The Tracks, 1965. Uncut. 1. I was warned not to play on the train tracks, so, naturally, I was there all the time. It was a great place to explore alone, and I was always alone. The best spot along the tracks was the black cast-iron bridge for the signal lights, which arched over both the eastbound and westbound lanes. It had a metal ladder along one side, which I was able to climb, and lying flat out on the catwalk, I had a bird's eye view in all directions. I tried to find courage to lie there when a train passed below, but I would always chicken out as soon as I saw the flash of a headlight on the horizon. I was always alone, so there was no one around to laugh at me, so I didn't care. I also liked to walk the tracks, heading west towards the fourth line, out past the factories, to where the farmers' fields were. Nobody was around, nobody could see me, and so nobody was going to bug me. One day I found a dead dog lying beside the tracks. Its head had been ripped off, and the brown fur was covered with hordes of flies. I could actually hear them buzzing before I saw the body. I didn't cry. It wasn't my dog, and I wasn't afraid either. I just looked. But one time, I saw something else. I had to take a piss, so I went down the embankment into the tall grass where I was invisible. And that's when I saw her. She was lying on her back like she was dead, but what really shocked me was the gaping hole at the end of her neck, where the head should have been. She was headless, like the dead dog I had seen that time. Her skin was snow white too, like she'd lost all her blood. Yet, she was still living. I couldn't see her chest moving up and down, so she didn't appear to be breathing, but I knew she wasn't dead. And I was pretty sure I knew what she was. Oh, I did know what she was. I thought I'd better get the heck out of there, but then I saw the purse. I knew I shouldn't do it, that it was wrong to steal, but since the old man died, I didn't get an allowance or anything like that, and there it was, and I opened it. I took $11 in bills, 1 5, 2 2s, 2 1s, and $1.40 in change, closed it, and put it down where I found it. There was stuff in there with her name on it, Linda, but with an Italian last name. I peeled away from there pretty fast, and I didn't look back. When I got back to the plaza, I thought about going to the variety store and using my loot to buy comics or a monster mag, but how would I explain them at home? We only had a small apartment, so Mom was bound to find them and then start asking questions. Questions I wouldn't want to answer. So I settled instead for some barbecue chips and some sweet tarts. I hid the rest of the money in the hidey hole at the bottom of the stairwell. Nobody knew what I did, but I still didn't feel good about it. 2. The bowling alley was in the plaza across the street from our apartment building, and right next to the train tracks. Mom was on a team that bowled every Tuesday night at 8, and as I was a big boy now, she thought it was okay to leave me home alone, with strict instructions to be in bed with the lights out at 8:30. But Mom was never home much before 9:30, so... Not that I did anything too bad. I was just a kid. But I liked to read. My favorite was nonfiction animal books. So I would lie on my bed in my PJs, my Star Trek ones, and read with the bedside lamp on, rather than hiding under the blanket with a flashlight. But this particular Tuesday was the day the day I found the money, and I didn't feel like reading. All I felt like doing was going to sleep, but I was afraid to turn the light off and be lying there, thinking about what I had done. I was glad at least that the bedroom drapes were shut tight. In the end, I decided to go to bed, but leave the light on. I knew Mom would be angry when she came home and found the lamp still burning, but I figured my being asleep would curb her wrath. Or so I hoped. So I lay there, waiting for sleep to come, and it wouldn't. All I could think of was the lady's headless body and the money, safely tucked away in the hidey hole. I had been lying there for a short time when I thought I heard something bump against the window. Must be the wind, I told myself, but I don't think I really believed that. A few moments later, I heard something bump against the window again, followed very shortly by a gentle sound, which reminded me of the slight noise made by a hand when touching the glass. I heard nothing more, but I had the sense something, or someone, was pressing against the pane. I was now really glad the drapes were shut and that I had resisted any temptation to open them. I got out of bed very slowly, trying to keep the bed from creaking, and stepping softly across the hardwood floor in my bare feet, moved over to the curtains and listened. Something was out there, I was sure of it, up close to the window and trying to see in and get in the room. I listened intently, trying to hear over the thundering of my heart and the hissing of the traffic on Kerr Street. I thought I could hear something, like a soft voice, whispering or murmuring in sleep, but I couldn't make out the words, couldn't even tell if they were in English. For a wild moment, I thought about tearing open the curtains to see what, if anything, was out there. But in the end, I decided I really didn't want to know. Instead, I crept back into bed and turned off the bedside lamp and lay still in the dark, as still as I could be. When I woke up, it was to find someone, Mom when she came back from bowling, had pulled back the bedroom curtains, but hadn't opened the window. Thank God! The woman had a small head, a slim face with a pointed nose, and long, stringy black hair. Her skin was pale, almost ghostly, but her eyes are what captivated me as I lay frozen on my bed, wide, almost bulging and glowing a pronounced red. The lips were a thin slash, and they appeared to be moving. So maybe she really was speaking, really was cursing me out. I quickly shut my eyes and lay as still as I could, pretending to sleep and hoping she would go away, just go away. I heard quick, light steps outside my bedroom door, and then Mom was in the room in her nightie, bending over me and softly asking, "Are you asleep?" I lay there, deathly quiet, so quiet I almost forgot to breathe. Mom just stood there, looking down at me, and after about a minute, she left the room. I half opened my eyes and looked at the window. Nothing there. As quickly and as noiselessly as I could, I got out of bed and went and closed the drapes. I was soon back to sleep, but in the end, wished I had somehow managed to stay awake. 3. It was late at night, and I was out on the tracks in my PJs, the rocks and railway ties freezing cold under my bare feet. I was already out behind the plaza and heading straight towards the iron light bridge. The lights hanging above the north tracks, the one I was walking on, glowed an emerald kryptonite green, indicating a train was coming from the east, right behind me. I wanted to turn around and run, wanted to go home. If Mom knew I was out at night, walking the tracks in my bare feet, she'd kill me. I had to get back before she got home from bowling. Wait, she was home from bowling. And then I knew I was being summoned and there was no escape. I staggered forward like a zombie, even though I flailed my arms like I was trying to fly. A light rain began to fall, and there was a mist in the night air, giving the landscape a strange, ethereal glow, magnified by the low, sepia clouds which seemed to hang there, just above the light bridge. I was soaked to the skin, the rain augmented by my tears. I was so wet I wondered if I'd pissed myself. I passed beneath the light bridge like a condemned man, walking beneath the gallows. I kept faltering along, compelled to move towards a final destination I wanted desperately to avoid, unable to stop, unable to flee. At last I reached the spot, leaving the tracks and wading through the tall wet grass. She was waiting for me. Her head was still attached, and as I arrived, she opened her red rim eyes, and she smiled. But it was not a friendly smile. As I watched in horrified fascination, she twisted her head vigorously back and forth, and then, with a gentle pop, it detached, hovered momentarily by the trunk of the neck, and then suddenly shot forward, as if it was planning to butt heads with me, her hair flapping like wet wings, mouth agape, and shrieking a long "een" sound. I was up on the tracks, trying to run, but my legs were like lead. The stones hurt my feet, and I just couldn't seem to move. I threw a quick look over my shoulder, and the head was hanging there, following right behind me, mouth open to reveal sharp, shiny teeth, and then everything around me went white. I turned my head, only to be blinded by the headlamp of the locomotive bearing down on me at full speed, no attempt to brake. The shriek of my tormentor and the roar of the train merged into a cacophony with my screams. And then it hit me, and everything around me went black. I awoke to find myself safe in bed, but my pajamas and bed sheets were sopping, so for a few moments I was afraid I had actually pissed the bed. And would Mom have been pissed? But then I realized it was only sweat, although that was bad enough. I had had a nightmare, and had practically drowned myself with perspiration out of sheer terror. I stripped butt naked, tossed my muggy pajamas onto the floor, and pulled back my blankets to help the sheets dry out. I knew then what I must do. The next afternoon, as soon as I could get away from school, I took what was left of the money, plus what small change I possessed, put it in an old leather envelope, and put it back where I had borrowed it. I then hightailed it out of there. I wouldn't be visiting the tracks for a while. I was pretty sure she was outside my window for a few days, but I slept with the curtains pulled tight, and I never peeped. I stayed in after dark, too, and resisted any urge to run across the street to the store for a bag of chips or something. I did see her one night, or at least I thought I did. Mom insisted I run across and get Irene from upstairs a deck of Alpines, and I had no choice but to go. I ran across as quickly as I could, but on the way back I saw something flit into the circle of light cast by the nearest street lamp. I bolted for the service door and didn't look back, even when I felt a flash of cold air on the back of my neck. Of course, by the end of the school year, I had forgotten all about it. I had other problems to worry about by then. The Tent, 1972. Uncut. That summer, we started sleeping out in various tents, in various backyards. The idea, of course, was to run around all over town as soon as the old folks were asleep. Our town had a curfew. Nobody under 18 was supposed to be out after 10 o'clock at night, and we liked breaking it every chance we got. The old people were afraid of us running wild and getting into drugs. Or maybe that wasn't the only reason they didn't want us out after dark. Not that we ever saw anything on our nocturnal expeditions. Until this particular night. We were in a tent in Rapper's backyard, whispering while waiting to take off. "I'm amazed they let us sleep out," I said quietly. "Why?" Whoever said it didn't sound particularly interested. "You know why," I answered simply. "Oh, not that again," Ricky said loud as usual, adding a none too gentle kick in the shins. "Hey, you guys remember Noreen?" I said. "Who?" More than one guy said it, so no, nobody remembered her. Nobody but me. The strange girl, the one with the wild hair, who used to wear those long dresses. "Her hair was a worse mess than Wimp's," Ricky cackled. Why couldn't that guy be quiet? "I think my hair is my best feature," Wimp noted with dignity. He never wasted time arguing with people about how butt ugly he was. "I'm pretty sure she was one of them," I said. "I think you had the hots for that ugly broad," Ricky snorted. "Did you know she lived in that old shack, the one on the other side of the train tracks?" No one had known that. In fact, no one had known anyone had been living in that battered hovel. Noreen lived with her grandparents. Her parents were gone, and nobody ever talked about them. That's why she kept to herself at school. How was she supposed to make friends? It's not like she could invite anyone over. Her grandparents were little better than hillbillies, and I don't think they even wanted Noreen to go to school, but they kind of had to let her. One night, an old black car pulled up in front of the shack and some people got out. They stood for a long time on the sagging front porch, talking through the screen door to the old man, who wouldn't let them in, while at the same time the old lady was holding Noreen in the back room, a virtual prisoner. But she could hear them, at least some of it, and at one point she heard a man's voice. An unfamiliar voice, but one she thought somehow that she knew, say, "She's ours and we're taking her." The voices sounded angry, and became louder and louder as the argument persisted. Eventually they drove away. Noreen could see the old people were upset, but they refused to answer any questions, or even to admit anything had even happened, until finally, when Noreen had persisted a bit too long with her questioning, the old man threatened to take his belt and give her a licking. But later that night, as she lay in her rumpled bed, Noreen heard a voice, which sometimes sounded faint and far away, but at other times seemed closer, clearer. "Noreen, Noreen, come out, come outside." Noreen was afraid to move, afraid of getting into trouble, so she lay there, trying hard not to listen, as the voice made her really want to go outside. "This story is making me want to go outside the tent," Ricky grumbled. She didn't say nothing in the morning either, but she did notice the old people were looking at her strangely, so she tried to act like nothing had happened. What could she do? She didn't have anyone she could talk to at school, no friends or a teacher even, so she just had to keep it to herself. And the next night, the voice came again, and this time Noreen tiptoed through the sleeping house and stepped out onto the porch. Two heads floated in the yard in front of the shack. She knew what they were, and she knew they were her parents, and that they had come to take her away. She was just about to go to them, and then her grandfather was there, with his .22, and he fired at the head of the man. The heads vanished into darkness, but it appeared the man had been hit. The old man gave a snort of triumph, but Noreen sprang at him, knocking the shotgun from his hands and pushing him off the porch. As he lay sprawled in the dirt, he watched in horror as Noreen's head detached from her body and flew right at him. She tore his throat out with her strong, yellow teeth. She killed the grandma, and then she set fire to the shack and burned it to the ground. They arrested her, of course, but she couldn't go on trial, not under those circumstances. My guess is that she's confined in 999 Queen Street, in a special cell with bars on the windows, and that every night she's under observation, and they watch every night while her head detaches from her body and then flies around the room. That's bullshit, Ricky said with disgust. I think it's true. Prove it. Did that old dump really burn down? Wimp asked calmly. Yeah, and I can show you guys, I said. Unless you're too scared to look. 2. After that, of course, everyone had to go and have a look. We had to take an indirect approach, as the shack was situated across the tracks from a Chrysler dealership, which was always brightly lit 24 hours a day. So we cut through the apartment parking lots to the farmer's field, and then followed the woods to Queen Mary, right by my old house. From there we followed the path along the back of some small factories, then across the tracks and into the real woods, right by the creek. The first thing we noticed was all the junk. Empty food containers, empty beer and booze bottles, even a couple of stained mattresses. Looks like somebody had an orgy, Rapp said. He had a thing about orgies. Hey, look, there's a used rubber, Ricky announced to the world. Be quiet, you guys, I said, my voice louder than usual. Let's get out of here before whoever was here comes back. Ricky said he wanted to stay and see an orgy, but I noticed he didn't stick around when the rest of us headed down the rutted dirt path to the remains of the hovel. We smelled it before we saw it. We had just enough reflected light to find our way, and by the time we had walked most of the way to Kerr Street, we found it, a pile of burnt wooden boards, surrounded by a hole where the cellar had been. Did she burn up the old lady inside? Ricky said. He was obviously willing to believe my story. For now. I found out why he was willing to believe it a moment later when he added, I think I can smell barbecue, eh? Freeze! The command was totally unexpected, so naturally we froze. I was blinded by the beam of a flashlight, and I sensed, rather than saw, the uniformed man who was approaching. All I could think of was, oh crap, now we're busted. The uniformed man identified himself as CN Police. What are you boys doing here? This is a crime scene, eh? So, she really did kill them? Ricky blurted. Fortunately, the officer took no notice. I thought there was a curfew, the CN cop said. What are you boys doing out, roaming around? We're sleeping out in the backyard, I said before Ricky could say something stupid. Your folks know you're out here? No, sir. Then I suggest you get back there before they miss you. The cop walked us all the way back to Queen Mary and told us he didn't want to see us again. We got back in the tent without mishap, where we debated going out again, this time to downtown. We were sure the CN guy would report the incident to the local fuzz, and that they would be keeping an eye out for 4 boys on the loose. The prudent thing to do would be to stay put. It would be a lot easier to get caught again if we went out. But then, everybody loves a challenge. We legged it. 3. I never told the guys the real reason I knew Noreen was a floater. The night it happened, the night the shack burned down, she came around to the apartment, or at least her head did. I was lying in bed, not really asleep, when I saw her face peering through the window at me. I could see the glint of her red eyes. I froze and pretended really hard to be unconscious, but she just wouldn't go away, just hung there, staring in at me. I guess she really liked me, even though I'd given her no encouragement. She wasn't very attractive. Eventually, I opened my eyes and she was gone. I could just imagine what Ricky would have said about it. Something about how she would have liked to have eaten me up. 4. Of course, we had to go back. The next time we slept out, there was a full moon, which made it just about perfect. Atmosphere. Besides, we figured it would be a good night for an orgy. Or orgy, as Wimp pronounced it. We followed the same path as before, but this time we took a good look around before crossing the tracks. We didn't want to get pinched by the CN cop again. This time he would turn us over to the local constabulary. The light from the full moon enabled us to look up and down the tracks in both directions. Not a creature was stirring anywhere. Not even a mouse. Ricky was about to go charging across when I grabbed his arm. Don't go across, go under. What? We go down on this side of the bridge and then come up on the other side. We'll be a lot less visible that way. Go under the bridge? That's what I just said, eh? I ain't going down there. There's all kinds of winos and perverts that sleep down there. You're about to go into the woods where there's floaters and maybe some kind of orgy. Floaters are bullshit, but winos are for real, and I don't want to have anything to do with those suckers. In the end, I won, and it was amusing to see Ricky hanging back for once. Luckily for us, we didn't encounter any winos, as I knew they could be mean suckers and not to be messed with. On the other side, the junk in the bottles, even the stained mattresses were still there, but somehow, perhaps because of the intense glare of the silvery moonlight and the equally strong shadows, they seemed creepier, like something more than mere screwing and drinking was going on. Something wrong. Something really wrong. Or maybe the full moon just made me think about werewolves and other beasties. The sudden clamor almost made me shit my pants. Wimp was the guilty party, and before I could react, Rap had cuffed him, spitting, "Be quiet, you idiot." "It was just a joke, eh? Do you want to bring the cops, or?" He left the rest unsaid. At any rate, Ricky and I had already separated them. The last thing we needed was a fist fight while creeping around in the woods. After everything had calmed down, Ricky decided it was his turn to stoke the pot. "I don't see no orgy." "Let's look around," I said. "What for?" "Oh, that's right. You think the woods are full of floaters. Night floaters. You want to go back to the tent?" "I didn't say that." "Oh, good. For a second there, I thought maybe you were afraid or something." We followed a trail further into the woods and along the top of the Hogsback Ridge, the creek below twisting around its base. Directly across from our vantage point, on the other side of the valley, we could make out the tombstones of St. Mary's Cemetery. Suddenly, Rap grabbed my arm. "There's people moving around in there." Squinting my eyes, I was able to make out a number of furtive shadows, flitting through the monuments. I also realized that if I could see them, they could see us. We were standing atop the ridge, bathed in brilliant moonlight. We were as visible as if we were on a stage in a theater. "Hurry, you guys. Take cover," I whispered, hoping for once that Ricky would refrain from answering in his normal, loud, speaking voice. We lay down in the grass on the side of the path away from the boneyard. By resting our heads on the top of our hands, we could see across to the other side. "That ain't no funeral," Wimp whispered. "Well, Rap, maybe you'll get to see your orgy after all," I said. "In a cemetery?" Ricky was shocked for once, but at least he kept his voice down. We watched in expectant silence, but as the minutes passed, I began to feel uneasy. What were those people doing over there? And then I remembered rumors I'd heard about certain things that liked to feast on dead bodies. They were known for having red eyes, eyes that I had seen myself, and as I looked more closely, I could see the lights moving around the graveyard, lights like pink fireflies, like pairs of reddish eyes, which was a dead giveaway. "Get back! In amongst the trees now," I hissed. Amazingly, everyone did as I said, and we were soon hidden in pools of shadow. I had time to take one glance over at the cemetery and saw all the pinkish firelights converging on one spot, as if they were trying to get their heads together. "What is it?" Rap whispered anxiously. It seemed like my fear had communicated itself without any explanation. My answer was simply, "Watch." And then we saw them, a flock of human heads, 7 in total, 4 men, 3 women, bobbing through the air, 100 feet above the waters of the creek below. We could see their faces clearly in the serious moonlight, their red eyes, and their hair trailing behind them. I buried my face in the grass, pushing Rap's face down as well, in case they could see our heads, white blobs in the shadows. We heard the air displaced as they passed overhead, but we could also hear them, a faint, almost murmured sound. We lay frozen in place for several minutes, until finally Ricky spoke, his voice shaking. "What the hell was that?" "You know what it was," I said a trifle smugly. Ricky had always said that floaters were BS, and I couldn't resist rubbing it in spite of our obvious danger. "We've got to get out of here now," Rap said, getting to his feet. "And Wimp, no more howling, eh?" I insisted we walk out, in order not to make noise and attract attention, although we moved fast enough to be almost jogging. When we arrived back at the tracks, we searched the area for flying heads, not CN cops. We even made our way home via brightly lit Kerr Street, with the idea the streetlights would provide us with some spiritual protection. Naturally, because we would have welcomed their attention, we didn't find a single cop. In the tent, we lay on our sleeping bags, lost in our own thoughts and fears. Finally, Ricky said, "I wouldn't have half minded getting picked up by the cops, you know. We could have told them about it." "You think they would have believed it? Hell, you didn't believe it." I know. Ricky sounded miserable. "It's just that they're up to no good, eh? Somebody's going to get hurt tonight. Maybe even killed." "Probably," Rap agreed. "But as long as it's not us who's dying." Rap was ever the pragmatist. "I just wish I knew what they were up to, that's all." Ricky just didn't want to let it go. In the end, we agreed we'd check the local rags the next day to see if they had any news about any attacks or about any vandalism at St. Mary's. And if we found anything, we'd consider our next move. But there was nothing. Nothing in print, anyway. The Silo, 1971, uncut. In the summertime, we like to go up on the roof of the apartment building. The structure, at the top of the elevator shaft, was surrounded by a concrete platform, and we would sit up there for hours, backs against the white brickwork, listening to a transistor radio and staring out across the town. It was the rapper who spotted it. "What the heck's that?" "What?" "Out there by the tracks. That tower." "I don't see anything." Eventually, by squinting, and by following the line of Rap's finger, I was able to see it. A beige turret, rising up in a wooded area by the train tracks over near the 4th line. "Looks like Dracula's castle," I said. We debated for a while about the identity of the mysterious castle, but in the end, we decided the only thing to do was investigate, and an hour later we were frantically pedaling our bikes through the roadside gravel, praying we didn't get wiped out by a truck. We were relieved to finally get to the 4th line where, after crossing the tracks and following a rutted track through the tall grass, we came upon the monolith, an abandoned silo. It was built of concrete, the round sides weathered to a beige finish. The top, where the conical roof had been, was now open to the sky. It was surrounded by the remains of the foundation, which included a partial cement floor over a space large enough for me to stand up in. After parking our bikes against the foundation, the rapper and I entered the lower section through a gap in the wall, which may have once held a pair of double doors. "What is this place?" I asked. It felt cold and clammy after being out in the hot sun, which made me add, "It feels like a crypt." "This must have been where they stored the grain," Rap said. "Stinks in here anyway," I added, for in addition to the chill, I had become aware of a fetid odor. Who knows what else I may have said, but at that moment our attention was distracted by the sound of an approaching car. "Someone's coming," Rap said, as if I hadn't noticed. We stepped out into the sunlight, which momentarily blinded us. When we had finished squinting, it was to see an enormous black 1950s tank crawling down the dirt trail towards us. The front grille, which resembled a huge grimace, was a dead giveaway as to the model. "Buick," I said, a statement, not a question. "Yeah, 1951, Rap agreed. This was an auto town, so we knew all the cars. The Buick pulled up close to the foundation, where the shorter grass made a sort of clearing. The guy who climbed out was tall and incredibly thin, and dressed entirely in black, including a turtleneck, even though it was hot as hell outside. His dark clothes and mop of black hair set off the pallor of his face, which had large, bloodshot eyes and needed a shave. In short, he didn't look like anyone I'd want to mess with. "This is private property, boys," he said without preamble. "You'll have to leave. Now." "You own this place, sir?" Rap asked, kind of smart alecky. He always did have a big mouth. "This is private property. You have to leave. Now." We had no choice but to grab our bikes and go. The dark man made no effort to get back into the Buick, but watched us as we pedaled down the dirt trail until we were finally out of sight. We had both noticed that while he had said it was private property, he hadn't said it was his property. But we kept our thoughts to ourselves until we got back to the apartment building, first checking over our shoulders to see if the old black tank was following us. "What the hell was that all about?" I said, annoyed at being run off. "He don't want kids running around there. Maybe they have orgies there at night." "You think?" I said, suddenly very interested. "Maybe. The guy looked like a pervert. But there is another explanation." "What?" "You know." "Oh, and then I did. He was one of them. A floater. A night floater." 2. Next summer, we started sleeping out in various tents, in various backyards. The idea, of course, was to run around all over town as soon as the old folks were asleep. Our town had a curfew. Nobody under 18 was supposed to be out after 10 o'clock at night, and we liked breaking it every chance we got. The old people were afraid of us running wild and getting into drugs. So we roamed the midnight streets, or at least we went to Tim Hortons. We had figured out that a person under the age of 18 wasn't in violation of the curfew, technically, if they were going to or coming back from a specific destination. The 24-hour ranch supermarket was good, but the best excuse of all was Tim Hortons downtown. If we got caught, the scenario played out like this. Cop: "What are you boys doing out?" Us guys: "We're sleeping out, sir, and we're going to Tim Hortons to get a dozen donuts." Cop: "Then you're going right back?" Us, in unison. Yes, sir. Cop. Well, don't let me catch you out again, running around. Us. Yes, sir. Sometimes we did go to Tim's if we had money, but even if we bought 12 assorted, we ate them while running around the early morning streets. On this particular evening, we had smokes. Export A. We found seats on a bench outside the public piss pots in Forster Park and lit up, me doing my very best not to start coughing again. Hey, man, Ricky jeered. You're not going to barf again, are you? What, smoking never made you feel ill? Nah. Bull roar! From our vantage point, we could watch any cars passing along the road in front of the park. Not surprisingly, there was very little traffic, even though this was a 3-shift factory town. We were looking in particular for cop cars, Ford Galaxies with their distinctive rectangular taillights. 2 or 3 vehicles drove quietly past when we saw a vintage car I instantly recognized. Rap, I whispered. Do you recognize that thing? Eh? Boomed Ricky. Shh. It's that guy from out at the silo. Put the butts out, I said quietly. Why? He can see them glowing in the dark. We watched as the black 51 Buick crept to the curb at a funereal pace, stopping at the foot of the path leading past the tennis courts into the interior of the park, and us. After a moment, the driver's side door opened, and by the light of a nearby street lamp, we could see a tall man, dressed entirely in black, get out and begin to look around, cocking his head to one side, as if he was sniffing the air. As he looked around, I caught the reflection of a pair of red eyes. It's him, all right, I said quietly. You sure? Positive. And I was. Satisfied he was alone, the dark man strode purposely towards the gravel trail, into the darkness of the trees. We remained hidden from him for the moment, but eventually he was bound to become aware of our presence. Let's go, I mouthed, standing up as lightly as possible, in preparation for slinking back into the shadows. But Rapp touched my arms and said, Let's wait and see what he does. I already knew what he was going to do, and I had no desire to see it. But still, I sat back down. The man had come up to the bocce courts, close enough for us to have pegged a stone at him, and hit him. As our eyes were adjusted to the darkness, we could see him clearly as he moved about in the half-light. Let's take him, Ricky breathed. No, I said, and it was my turn to put a restraining hand out to stop him. What's he doing? Wimp said. The thin man had taken off his jacket and lay down on the grass. We didn't wait to see more. Without a word, we got up and began to run as noiselessly as possible towards Riverside. We might have made it without being seen, but Wimp chose that exact moment to trip and fall, colliding with Ricky, who bellowed, "Shit!" loud enough to wake the whole neighborhood. And that's when the running really started. 3. We ran pell-mell towards Riverside, making for the edge of the ravine leading down to the creek, to the relative safety of the bushes and trees, exactly where we would be expected to go. As we charged towards the edge, I noticed a nearby house surrounded by a tall, dark green hedge. I gestured towards it, and as I was in the lead, the rest followed without the usual argument. We cut through a narrow gap and collapsed into the shadows, trying desperately to get our breathing under control. I could dimly see the road and lay peering into the darkness, waiting for it to happen. And it did. After 2, maybe 3 minutes tops, I noticed a white, spherical object appear around the curve of the road, slowly moving in our direction. I knew what it was before I could make it out clearly, and as it drew closer, I saw that it was indeed a human head, a floater. "What's happening?" Ricky wanted to know, but I silenced him with a noiseless smack to the side of his head. His hard head. The man's face was gaunt, almost cadaverous. The pale skin was pockmarked, and he needed a shave. The bulging eyes had a reddish glint, his mop of black hair flowing out behind him as he moved through the warm night air. I had seen him before, and the thought that he might know me, know who I was terrifying. As I watched in petrified silence, I could see his small nose flaring, as if he was sniffing the air, and I wondered, in sheer terror, if he could scent us. And I was sure we had probably left a pretty ripe trail. He coasted along the edge of the ravine, and I saw that I had been right, that he had figured we would have taken to the creek and its many trails, where he could have attacked us at will. A car drove by, and he floated into the shadows, only to emerge once the street was clear. He was heading in our direction. His movements reminded me vaguely of a nightmare or bad dream I had had many, many, many years ago. We were trapped. An old Ford Custom pulled up in front of one of the houses across from the ravine. It looked like there were a couple of guys sitting in the front seat, sitting and talking, and not in any hurry to move from their position. I couldn't hear what they were talking about, just voices, but I could hear the car radio and even recognize the song that was playing, Black Magic Woman by Santana. The floater had completely disappeared into the shadows, although I thought I caught a glimpse of something white flash through the trees near the other end of the curve. "Come on," I whispered, pushing my way back through the hedge, heading in the opposite direction from that taken by our pursuer. We ran lightly along the grass at the edge of the lawns, rather than on the hard asphalt, in an effort to keep the noise down. We looked for cars constantly, but now we were not just wary of Ford Galaxies, but were also on the lookout for vintage Buicks. We made it back without incident, and didn't leave the tent for the rest of the night, sleeping instead of talking. 'Cause talking might attract things. Things we didn't want to attract. 4. Grade 10, I hung out with Bag, which meant wandering the streets at all hours of the day and night, as if there was anything happening, anything to see. Ha ha. There wasn't, but we still tramped all the highways, byways, and alleyways. It was a really dirty winter. No snow, but squalls of cold, benumbing rain right off the lake and down the back of my neck. We spent a lot of time in Tim's, teasing the girls behind the counter and reading the latest atrocities in the scandal sheet. But as coffee cost money, and we were often broke, we spent a lot of time outside. One of our favorite spots was the park by the lake, especially on those wild, tempestuous nights when the dark waters had been whipped into frenzy by a nocturnal gale. In the middle of the park, there was an old, weather-beaten gazebo, its green paint chipped and faded, and we would sit there on the picnic table, strategically placed in the center of the floor, and listen to the huge breakers crashing into the rocky shore. It was often too cold to smoke, and so we would just sit there, listening and talking about all the things we were going to do once we fled this turkey town. On a Hyperborean night in late November, we were passing the Dominion store on our way to Tim's when I noticed a familiar vehicle heading west on Lakeshore. A black 1951 Buick. You see that thing? I muttered, a stab of cold fear making me keep my voice down. That old Buick, Bag said, gesturing towards the car, which was moving slowly in the downtown traffic. Don't look at it, I barked, practically jumping out of my skin. Why not? I'll explain. And later, as we sat with our double-doubles at the picnic table in the gazebo, I told him the whole story of the night floaters, or at least all I knew about it, from personal experience. Is this really true? Bag asked, his arching eyebrows looking even archer than usual. Everything I've told you about this is true. How come I never heard about it? I don't know. I've often wondered about that myself. We're older now, adults really, but we never really talked about them that much, even when we were kids, like we were afraid to mention them. I've never really heard any of the old people talk about them. I've got an idea, Bag said. This is too good an opportunity to miss. And, like a fool, I listened to him, as I always did. Like a fool. Fool.